Good morning, it's Friday, October 31st, 2025. I'm meteorologist Andrew Pritchard taking a look at your Canadian Prairie weather story. Happy Halloween. Nothing terribly spooky about the forecast here. We've got a jet stream that stays active overhead. We've got ridging high pressure anchored over the prairies, though, with low pressure over the Pacific Ocean and then low pressure over the Atlantic there. So we're kind of flanked by areas of low pressure. That keeps us on the quiet side. With several lows traversing the region, we do have areas of low pressure passing overhead. They'll bring light showers, some flurries at times, but a lot of dry real estate from the Canadian prairies down into the northern plains, the central U.S., the Midwest, the U.S. Just a lot of dry real estate across North America here. We'll keep it mild into early November. We've seen some cooler air, some shots of cooler air over the last couple of weeks, but with high pressure really anchoring itself into early November, look for a mild start to the month here through the first 7 to 10 days. Looking at the last 10 days of precipitation, again, it's been pretty quiet in a lot of corners here. Peace River, Grand Prairie, you keep that rain coming. Some snow early on. We had some precipitation north of Highway 16 through northern portions of Alberta and Saskatchewan. We've also had some rain kind of persistently with some of these lows lifting into portions of southern Manitoba. So almost 2 inches of rain in Winnipeg over the last 10 days, but a lot of dry real estate between there and portions of British Columbia and northern Alberta. So as we take a look at the satellite picture, this is really illustrating the pattern well. We get these big lows across the Pacific Ocean, bringing a lot of Pacific moisture into British Columbia, parts of the Pacific Northwest. Get these big lows that kind of spin up here across the eastern U.S. up into the maritime Canada here. And then a lot of quiet, real estate here across the, from the Canadian prairies down into the U.S. I keep mentioning just this whole corridor here, pretty dry over the next 10 to 14 days. Now you do see at times some of these areas of low pressure, they kind of come in and then take a trajectory here along the U.S. and Canada border as the jet stream stays kind of parked up there. But with ridging here, we just get kind of these weaker lows, kind of these little cutoffs that meander down south, bringing us some light showers, maybe a recent reinforcing shot of some cooler air. That's what this low right here is doing. But we're going to see even fewer of these sinking down into the region over the next 10 days, more of these quick passing lows that pass near or overhead, near or north of the prairie. Precipitation, again, quiet as we get started here. Dry across the prairies, except for some light showers in far southeastern portions of Saskatchewan, southern Manitoba. And we got some moisture here being deposited across portions of British Columbia as well. I mentioned some cooler air being tugged down by some of these lows. We've got temperatures anywhere from -5 to -8 across a lot of Alberta and western Saskatchewan. A little warmer out in advance of this low. We've got temperatures above freezing across central and southern portions of Manitoba. And you can see that low here as we bring back the precipitation forecast, the NAM model here. Just very light flurries, maybe some light showers here as we head through the rest of the day today across southern portions of Manitoba. Some cooler air being tugged down behind that one. We've got another low that passes north of the region Saturday. Some flurries possible across northern portions of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. As this front kind of drapes back across the region, can't rule out a couple of raindrops or flurries Saturday night into the day on Sunday across areas along and south of Highway 16. So southern southern Saskatchewan into southern portions of Manitoba on Sunday. Can't rule out a couple raindrops or some snowflakes, but not expected to be a big precipitation maker. Now we'll take a look at the European models to take a little bit deeper into next week. So here's your Friday low as we get started today. Light flurries, light rain showers possible across southeastern Saskatchewan into southern Manitoba. And then as we walk this into Saturday, you see the first area of low pressure passing off to the north. And then we'll take this into Sunday. We get this third area of low pressure here, 3 lows in 3 days. Now, this one could bring that light shower activity, maybe some light flurries to you guys here during the day on Sunday as it quickly makes its way through. This is from, on Sunday night, getting into Sunday morning, and then this would be a midday Sunday. This low is already moving off into Ontario. Just some very light flurries, maybe trailing behind this one. So as we kind of look at the total precipitation through Wednesday, November 5th, this is precipitation by type from the overnight European model. You can see a corridor there right along, very near Highway 16, where we may get more in the way of accumulating rainfall here, but we're still talking about super light amounts. I mean, like 5 to 10 millimeters of precipitation here, and then maybe that chance for some very light flurries, but nothing accumulating until you get to the higher elevations in far western portions of Alberta. And so as we just look at really the next 10 to 12 days, overall from the European ensemble, where do you see heavy precipitation in that red shading? It's west and east of us here. So British Columbia, heavy coastal rains, high elevation snows, and then all the way off across parts of the northeastern U.S. into, maritime Canada, some heavy precipitation in those areas as well. But the next 10 to 12 days across much of the prairie, we're talking about less than a few tenths of an inch here, a few millimeters here from these passing lows that bring in some showers or some flurries. So this is really the pattern illustrated. Big low here across the Pacific, troughing across the northeast U.S. and maritime Canada with ridging in between. And as I just kind of animate this, you see the pattern fluctuating a bit. These are 5-day sliding windows here, so we kind of keep the pattern in front and center. And it's this low west ridging overhead, and then it's the low east. And so the question is when or if we're going to get this low to kind of move east, kind of sliding in here across the western U.S. in a way that would bring more in the way of maybe a big area of low pressure with heavy precipitation into the region. So here's a jet stream flow going around this screaming flow. I mean, we're talking about 100 to 120 knots at 500 millibars. This is right around where those commercial airliners are flying around. So a lot of flow coming around the base of that trough, bringing a lot of moisture into British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest. And then you see the fast flow over here, and we just get caught kind of in between across the prairies. So I'll animate this. We'll watch some of these lows ejecting. So here's, taking it through the weekend. Here's this little piece of faster flow going off to the north. We know we've got that low passing through northern portions of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba on Saturday. This is the strong flow that comes in Saturday night into Sunday with that next area of low pressure that could bring some light showers, maybe some flurries to the prairies during the day on Sunday. Nothing significant as far as accumulating snow or heavy rainfall, but certainly I could see some precipitation on Sunday. This one, as we get into Monday and Tuesday, moves on into the Great Lakes. So now you see this kind of hump in the flow. That is that ridging there. So troughing, ridging, and then troughing. We get back into this pattern that's going to be pretty mild and pretty quiet as we head into the early part of November. Quiet as far as accumulating precipitation. We keep getting these little ripples in the flow, though. Here's one that comes in Monday night into Tuesday. These could all trigger these little areas of low pressure that come sweeping through, and they really become more intense as the jet stream comes off, kind of rounds the base of this trough in the northeast U.S. and eastern Canada. So the lows are intense here. They weaken as they come over the top of that ridge over the Rockies, and then they get reinvigorated here over across the Great Lakes. So we're sandwiched in between where it's active, and we get these big lows. So we'll take this towards the end of the loop, and I do want to say, as we get out of here into what you want to call model fantasy land here, you really got to kind of step away from the specifics and understand this is just something that could happen. You just watch these lows continue. Here's another one. This is November 7th and 8th. Here's another one that comes in November 10th and 11th. And what I want to show you here is at the very end of the loop, as we get into November 12th and 13th, the models are wanting to try and allow some of these lows to kind of punch in across the Rockies before they start to eject then and lift in across the plains. And that would potentially bring a more impactful precipitation event, more impactful low to the prairies. But this is getting out towards the very end of the forecast, and I want to keep it kind of focused on the next 10 to 12 days, which is active but not a good trajectory for precipitation across the prairies. Why is that? We take a look at the precipitable water. One of my favorite charts, one of the most difficult to kind of pronounce though. This is showing the flow of moisture here, and you can see these atmospheric rivers, this really thick plume of moisture being drawn in from the Pacific by these big areas of low pressure. And we do get some of that moisture that comes in here. This is your Sunday storm system that brings the light showers, maybe some light flurries. You get a push of dry air on the backside there. And then as we get into November 3rd, 4th, and 5th, we get another push. But you see the trajectory here, right up into British Columbia. The Pacific Northwest is really the focal point here. We drag again a little bit of moisture into the prairies that will supply some showers, some flurries potentially across the area. Here comes another one, and you just see these plumes. They wrap up and they get kind of brought into British Columbia, the Pacific Northwest, but they're not being deposited here across the prairies. I'm just kind of trying to, in multiple ways, illustrate the pattern issue here, where it's active, but it's not one that's really efficiently precipitating across the prairies. Not until potentially we get toward the middle part of November, maybe get one of these lows that kind of wraps up in this area and would tug some more moisture northward from the Gulf and get us a more impactful storm system here. It's possible with a pattern like this, but over the next 10 days, I think it's unlikely, maybe potentially more likely as we get into kind of week 2, days 12 to 16. So this is where we can look at the precipitation forecast from the European model. Well, we've already looked at the next 5 to 6 days, but here's your Saturday low that passes north. Here is your Sunday low that brings some light showers, maybe some light flurries to the prairies. You're quiet then as we get into Monday. You're mostly quiet as we get into Tuesday, but here again, I mentioned those little ripples within the flow coming over the ridge, potentially bringing some showers. This is the type of pattern, these are the type of little, systems coming over that ridge that would bring us summertime thunderstorms. So we get to a season like this in early November, we just have less moisture available, and it's not a very stormy time of the year with these lows kind of making this trajectory. Now we get into November 6th. November 7th, certainly active. I mean, the isobars are very tightly packed together here. We've got jet stream activity. We've got areas of low pressure, but they're not really, again, continuing to eject in a way that's going to bring us a real robust event here across the prairies until maybe we get toward the middle part of November. And I'll show you that here as we just walk the European model out a little bit further. Again, here's a pretty good area of low pressure, 994 millibars. Certainly some blustery winds circulating around this, but not a lot in the way of precipitation. We're talking about scattered showers, maybe some flurries with this one. And then we'll walk it all the way out here November 9th. This is November 10th. Same thing, another pretty intense low. It'll be blustery. Not a lot of concentrated precipitation with this one. Maybe starting to stack up some dustings near and north of Highway 16. And then we've got this next area of low pressure. This is the one that I mentioned, 988 across the Dakotas into Minnesota. This would potentially bring us a better precipitation shield on the north side of this low. But we are now talking about November 13th and 14th getting way out there. We've got 2 forecast updates really to go before we get out there. But this is what could happen. We've got a very active Pacific jet. This is something that could be on the table with a pattern like this, but we need to kind of bring this low that's been anchored across the Gulf of Alaska and allow it to kind of shift eastward a bit to change up the trajectory. Instead of these lows getting flung up into British Columbia, we want to get them flung up here into the Dakotas, into parts of the prairies. We know that that is on the table here, potentially with this pattern as we head deeper on into the winter. I'll show you the winter outlook once again. We've kind of looked at that last week, but the next 10 days from the European model on the left, again, maybe a ribbon of precipitation getting north of 10 millimeters here near and north of Highway 16, but south of that, we're talking about chances for showers, chances for flurries. Most folks over the next 10 days, though, anywhere from a trace to maybe 5 to 10 millimeters of precipitation. As I walk it all the way out to days 10 to 15, November 10th through the 15th on the right there, you see the impact of that potential storm system here as we get out into the 10 to 14 day time frame. A big change there, depositing maybe, I'm not even going to touch the amounts because this over here on the right, I want to use extreme skepticism on. It's just this is the potential as we get deeper into this pattern. Really what I want to focus on, though, over the next 15 days, the European ensemble, this is the probability of picking up less than half an inch of precipitation over that 15-day forecast period, where you see the orange and the red shading, that being from the Canadian prairies all the way down through the plains, the southwest U.S., down to the Gulf Coast of the U.S. It's just a dry pattern. Where you see the white shading, that's where it's likely to be stormier, rainier, snowier. That is from British Columbia down into the Pacific Northwest of the U.S., and then you got to make your way east over toward the Great Lakes, the Northeast U.S. and Maritime Canada. There it is just dry in between until we shift and wiggle this pattern just a little bit. The very active Pacific jet, good. The current layout here with that trough ridge, trough pattern, not great for heavy precipitation. I do have some confidence that it will change, though, as we go through the next few weeks. I want to talk briefly about the potential for some blustery days. I mentioned these lows. They'll have some blustery winds along with them. We get one here on Sunday, probably a blustery day with those gusts 50 to 60 miles per hour. You get the strong southerly flow as the storm system comes in, and then southwesterly or westerly flow on the backside. This would be your Monday. Getting into Tuesday, we get that next low that kind of sweeps along the U.S.-Canada border on Tuesday. And then we can just run it through here and just watch each of these lows kind of swirl their way through the prairie, each one bringing some blustery winds. Max wind gusts over the next 5 to 6 days. So this would be looking at your weekend and Tuesday storm systems. We're talking about wind gusts getting into that 60 to 70 kilometer range. So I know that we can do better across the prairies. You can certainly do windier. We'll likely do windier, but you're going to start to notice an uptick in these blustery days as these lows traverse the region. Not a lot of cold air off to the north to be brought down by these lows, and again, without a big trough anchoring itself across Western Canada, we're simply not going to touch any of these big prolonged intrusions of cold air. So the pattern with ridging anchored overhead is going to lean mild. Of course, we're talking early November mild, so you're not going to be sweating out there, but just kind of a lack of cold air to be dragged down into the region as of right now. I mentioned the outlook here as we get into December, January, February does turn much more active. The outlook does, at least, and this kind of is why I have that higher confidence that eventually this Pacific jet stream that is extremely active is going to start to pay off here in the form of some bigger storm systems. So maybe just enjoy the quiet right now before a potentially active winter across the Canadian prairies. And we all know what that could mean. It only takes a couple of storms to really define a winter season. And that Pacific jet stream is active and essentially waiting in the wings, ready to deliver it. So the outlook stays active as we talk about December, January, and February, one that likely looks cold and very stormy across the prairies. So hang on. Let's just wait and see. This is the outlook here as we get into November 14th and 15th from the European Ensemble model. You see that blip of blue across the Pacific Northwest. That is indicative of potentially bringing some troughing into the western portions of North America here that could potentially then bring us more in the way of impactful storm systems and impactful precipitation to the region. Those temperatures, though, I mentioned, going to be on the mild side. Highs anywhere from 7 to 13 degrees here in Calgary. Lows kind of bouncing around the freezing mark. Edmonton, you'll be a few degrees below freezing for your overnights, but those highs also in the mid to upper single digits over the next few days. Regina, highs around 11, 10 degrees through the holiday weekend. Same thing here in Saskatoon and then over in Winnipeg. A little cooler as this first low passes through. 6 degrees today, 5 for the high tomorrow, up to 12 on Sunday, though, as that next area of low pressure sweeps through. Again, pretty mild. Blustery at times and chances for some light showers, maybe some flurries over the next 10 to 14 days, but we'll continue to look out maybe towards mid-November for a more impactful storm system to potentially swing through the region. Have a great Halloween, a wonderful weekend. I'll talk to you in the first week of November.